Guy here. Today I interview Sunny Jacobs. Her and her husband were wrongly convicted for murder when she was 27 years old. She spent 17 years in prison, 5 years in solitary confinement, and finally all charges were dropped and released. This story Hollywood couldn't even script. What she went through and the place where she chose to choose life and live from the heart is incredible. I promise you, you will be inspired. If you enjoy these conversations on YouTube, I would really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button, hit the like, and please leave me a comment. Let me know what you think of this episode. I read all my comments and it's great to connect with you. Anyway, enjoy the show. Sunny, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Guy. It's a pleasure.
I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Dom. He mentioned your name in the conversation on the podcast, and I hadn't heard of you. I was intrigued instantly, and I thought, wow, I must reach out to Sunny, and I was just compelled. So for you to be here today is deeply appreciated, Sunny. I can say that much.
Well, thank you. I shall thank Don Wood as well. He's a very interesting man.
He is, and we had a wonderful conversation as well. With the software we're using, if it gets a bit pixelated, it's because it's recorded. It won't take away anything from the end product at the end of the show. I mentioned that before. So
that's fine. I'm a bit pixelated anyway.
So before we go back into what's been your journey and your life, I ask everyone the same question on the show. I wanted to start the same way today. And that is, if we were at an intimate dinner party right now and you sat next to a complete stranger and they just said to you, what do you do for a living? What would you say?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say my husband and I run a foundation to help people who were wrongly convicted of crimes they didn't commit when they're released so that they can begin the healing process. That's what I would say.
Researching today, listening to how you met Peter. Even that is an incredible story in itself, your husband. You know,
Peter, yeah.
Which I'd love to touch on during the call. But what's the general reaction you get from that if somebody says, because you're the first person I've heard of that actually does this?
Actually, until very recently, nobody else really was. There have been attempts to do it. Often people who were wrongly convicted want to give back for having been blessed, the good fortune of having someone help them, because without help, without pro bono help, meaning willing to work for free to help somebody who they believe is wrongly convicted, I don't know anyone who would be released. They feel so grateful for what they received and the help that they got that they also want to help others. Often they go into trying to help people get their case overturned or in the legal part of it. Peter and I, that's not our expertise. Our expertise is in the healing part. We, before we met, each had taken the same path, which we found incredible, which was yoga, meditation, and prayer. This became my trinity. While I was sentenced to death, when I had to transition from the nice, quiet death row, which I was the only one there. I was the only woman with a sentence of death at the time. So it was pretty quiet there, into the population of the prison, which was, to me, just what I'd see with a death sentence. When I went into the prison population, that was another strange transition that I had to deal with. I used those same disciplines. When I was finally released 17 years later, I again use those disciplines for that transition. And that's what I do to this day. You know, I use yoga, meditation, and prayer. That's how I learned to function in whatever world I was tossed into. And now incredible. I know that that's all part of my journey.
Yeah, well, they help so many. I mean, yoga, meditation, and prayer, because I look at prayer as an intention, and they've been so powerful to me over the years and have allowed me to have courage to lean into what my heart wants to lead me to. And as opposed to suppressing that, I'm truly learning, and it is my mission to help inspire others to listen to that too. And it's been those very things, you know, like you said, to be able to reflect back and allow you to get through what you did. Just incredible. Do you mind sharing a little bit about the wrong conviction? Because if I'm not mistaken, you were in Florida with your husband and two children, and your car broke down. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes. And we had to ask a friend of mine. Basically, it ended up with us being at the wrong place at the wrong time. He ended up panicking. I can't speak for him, but that's how it seems to me because he just panicked and policeman because at the time, he was on parole. I always say to people, when you accept a lift, you don't ask to see the person's driver's license.
No.
When you get into somebody's car, you'd say, is your license current? Or been in trouble? Or might you be on parole? Or, I mean, I just, so had I known that, maybe I wouldn't have accepted the lift because he was afraid they were going to take him back to prison because he was on parole. He panicked. But anyway, he killed them. And then he took us hostage and drove us off in the police car. And which meant that in the back seat, you can't open the doors from the inside. My son was 9 years old and my daughter was only 10 months old. She was nursing at the time. And I thought, oh, now I can get away. But the doors were locked. You can't open them from the inside. So we ended up, there was a roadblock. He tried to avoid the roadblock to evade capture. When he did, the police at the roadblock opened fire on the car. The second time that day, I covered the children. We crashed. He was the only one who was injured. He was shot in the leg. When we crashed, the police surrounded the car and we were all taken into custody. The children were put in a separate police car and taken away, supposedly to be taken care of by social services while we got everything straightened out. But in actual fact, they weren't being cared for at all. My son was interrogated and tested for gun residue, and even the baby was, from then on, it was like we were living in some nightmare, really.
As you mentioned, you were the first lady to be put onto death row, and your partner at the time, your husband. Is it right? You went into 5 years of isolation from that point after?
Yes. What happened was when we were taken in, the man who did the killing was in the hospital because he was injured and knew he was facing the electric chair in Florida at the time. And so he immediately asked to see the prosecutor and make a deal so that he could avoid being sentenced to death. He received 3 life sentences in exchange for his testimony against my husband, Jesse, and me. Although they had evidence of probable innocence from the beginning, they gave him a lie detector test to justify giving him the plea bargain. And they filed a report that said that he passed the lie detector test. But in actual fact, we found out 17 years later that he failed the lie detector test and the report was a false report. So they actually did know that they were making the deal with the killer. And yet they went ahead because it suited their ends, because they wanted to have 3 convictions. And the prosecutor then ran for a higher office. That was the motivation. And that's what happened. Jesse was sentenced to death in a trial that lasted 4 days with no physical evidence, just on the testimony of the man who made the bargain. My trial came later. It lasted 2 weeks because I had never been in trouble for anything violent before. I was a mother of 2 young children. I was kind of a hippie, peace and love, and a vegetarian. If you knew me, you'd know I wouldn't kill anybody. I was always saving stray animals, or even one time I found a cricket who was missing a leg and I put it in a little matchbox and had to take care of it. So that was who I was. So when our friends heard on the radio, because the TV was on, all the news, about what happened, and heard my name in connection with this terrible incident, something had to be really wrong, and they called a lawyer. And the lawyer tried all day to find me and was told that they didn't know where I was. About 10:30 at night, he showed up at the jail and insisted on seeing me. He refused to leave till he did. So that's when I finally was allowed to see a lawyer. I thought, when you're arrested, you're entitled to a phone call. Everybody knows that. But when I asked for my phone call, they laughed at me and told me that's just on television. And actually, they could 2 hours without giving me a phone call. And by then, they might. And then I knew they could do anything. Finally, when the lawyer did come and find me, the interrogation ended and he inquired as to my treatment. I was booked into the jail as a prisoner after midnight. Until then, I wasn't even booked in. And there's the procedure that's supposed to be followed when you're arrested. You're supposed to be taken before a magistrate. And yet that never. So my trial lasted 2 weeks. In the second week of the trial, they realized, I guess, that they weren't convinced. So locating a young woman in the jail who had been arrested for a minor drugs charge with her boyfriend, they convinced her that if she could help them to convict me, she and her boyfriend would be released the next day. But if not, then her life would be ruined. So she did what she had to do. And she said that I had made a confession to her, and I enjoyed it, and I would do it again. So anyway, the jury wasn't convinced either. And so a number of written questions to the judge. The judge had been a former highway police, and before he was a judge. So we felt that he couldn't possibly be neutral. He refused to recuse himself from the case. In fact, he was the judge on all 3 of the cases. Instead, he instructed the jury as to the law, the way he wanted them to see it. As a result, they felt they had no option but to convict the law at the time. I know one of the questions was, could they even consider a lesser degree of some sort, like an accomplice or something? Apparently, they were not allowed to do that, which I wouldn't have been anyway. So I was convicted. And then the sentence separate took place. They have to be unanimous in order to give you a death penalty. But one of the jurors wasn't comfortable with the conviction. So he certainly wasn't going to sentence me to death or be bullied into it by the other jurors. I actually took the time and locate me when he read in a magazine that I had been released. And he and his wife rented a camper van. They came and found me in California. He told me what happened in the jury room and apologized. He said they had been sequestered for 2 weeks. They were tired, hungry, and wanted to go home. They wanted him to agree with them to give me this death sentence because they wanted to make an example of a woman, to send a message to all those criminals out there that if you kill somebody in Florida, you will go to the electric chair. Because I was writing continually during the trial because I didn't understand a lot of the language. My lawyer was a lawyer that he actually said that he wasn't going to put up any defense because there was no evidence against me. So that would give him a better position in the closing arguments. I didn't do anything wrong. I have nothing to worry about, right? The truth will set you free, right? I didn't know it would take 17 more years. So I did what my lawyer said. As a result, one juror decided he was not going to be bullied, and he voted for life. So that meant they couldn't give me the death. But the judge overruled and gave me the death penalty anyway. In those days, that was allowed in certain states, Florida being one of them, but he would have to give a reason for having done so, and he didn't. I was sentenced to death. I became the only woman with a death sentence in the United States at that time because there had been a moratorium on using the death penalty for a while. So there were no women on death row. I was the only woman with the sentence of death. They put me in the women's maximum security prison in a separate building, separated from the rest of the population. I wasn't allowed any contact with any other prisoners, and the guards were under instructions not to speak to me. That's part of their protection, because you can't become friendly with someone and then be expected to assist in taking that person's life. So the death penalty actually affects everyone involved, really. I was put in this cell in this building all by myself. I only got out of my cell twice a week for a brief shower, and then they would give me some prison clothes, and I would be allowed out in a courtyard for about 15 minutes with a guard who didn't speak to me. Then I'd be taken back in, given my white pajamas with my number on it, and taken back to my cell for another 3 or 4 days until they'd come and get me again. So there were no phone calls. My cell was 6 steps from the door, and if I reached out my arms, I could touch both. There was a metal shelf with a thin mattress on one side. That was the bed, and sink and toilet combination at the end, and that was it. It was a solid metal door with a small window opening through which they would look every hour to see what I was doing and write it down. That was where I was told I was to spend my life until they decided to take it from me. At first, I got no letters. There were no phone calls. I just paced back and forth. I think it's actually, in a way, the most important part of this story, because it's where I had to come face to face with the possibility of my own death, of the possibility that I might never see my children again. If I believed what they said, there was no one.
Had they given you a date at that point, or were you just in this unknown?
You're sort of in limbo. They don't give you a date. Now, when Peter, my husband, was sentenced to death, he was wrongly convicted in Ireland. They gave him a date right away. But for me, there was no date set. In the US, it can take years before they actually set a date. People have wanted to shorten that, but that would be another mistake, because there have been so many instances that we know where there was a wrongful conviction. And if you shorten that time and you shorten the procedure, then hope that you figure that out sooner. But what actually happens is that the appeals process is not as in-depth and extensive, and you could end up where someone would be executed who was wrongly convicted and was innocent.
I'm curious to know, because I believe you were in that solitary confinement for 5 years before being released back into the main prison.
Mm.
During those 5, you in any kind of contact via letter to Jesse at all, or did you know anything that was going on? Is there a point where you kind of made peace with the fact that you were going to die and you just accepted it, or how did the psychological part of that play out? I just can't imagine. I struggle to put myself there and how I would deal with something like that.
I did too. At first, I wasn't dealing with it. I was overwhelmed. When this whole thing happened, it was as if it was totally surreal. It wasn't real. Shaking me and woke me up, having an awful dream. And it would be much more believable than what was. I didn't feel that anything in my life previously had prepared me to deal with the situation that I was in. I was angry, afraid, confused, and hopeless for a while, until one day, the only 2 books I was allowed at that point in time in my cell was a law book and a Bible. Now, the law book was incomprehensible to me at that time. The Bible was a book of wisdom that I used to open up to any page. At that point, I wasn't really sure if I believed in God anymore, because I didn't think that if there was a God, that God could pause. My whole family was sentenced. My whole family suffered. My parents had a job getting my children back. It took them 2 weeks to get the baby, the 10-month-old, and 2 months to get my 9-year-old son, who was put into juvenile detention. I was told that was done as pressure on me to try to get me to say whatever they wanted me to say. After 2 months, they finally got a judge to release my son into their custody. He was so traumatized, taken to interrogations, handcuffed behind his back, 9 years old, with no representation to be interrogated, that he had to be put in special schools. And he still, to this day, suffers the effects of that trauma. My daughter, the 10-month-old, well, she grew up without ever having known what it was like to be with her real family. Fortunately, my parents were able to take care of them. By the time I was actually in my death cell, the children were with my parents. So I knew at least they were safe and being well taken care of. When I finally started getting letters from my parents and from Jesse, that helped a lot, you know. And then Jesse would write me letters and try to cheer me up and tell me everything would be all right. And they'd figure out they made a mistake. But in the meantime, the reality was that I was sentenced to death and I was in this cell that I couldn't leave and completely at the mercy of the merciless. Says I felt I would open up the Bible and it would always say something I needed to hear. It's a book of wisdom, no matter what else you believe. One day I read something that told me they don't really get to say when I die. And I realized that I didn't have to accept their version of what was happening. It was true. It wasn't that I was going into denial. In fact, I had a choice, which they made me feel that I had none. I had a choice to believe either in hope or hopelessness. If I believed in what they said, then my situation was hopeless and I may as well forget it. But if I believed that there was something out there in which I could depend, some energy, some force, whatever you want to call it, then there was hope. That one instant changed everything for me. Then comes the work, of course. I realized that it didn't have to be the way they said, and that I could turn my cell into a sanctuary where I could do my spiritual work, which I didn't have time for at home with 2 kids and a husband, and use the time that I had, be as long or short, to make myself the best person I could be. So that when they figured out they made a mistake and sent me home, I'd have something left inside me to give to the children. And if it was for some strange reason of karma that they were going to take my life, then it was do I felt to make myself the best person that I could be in the time that I had left. So that's what I decided to do. And that's what I did. A yoga class. I'd only seen Lilius yoga and you. And that was my me time. And it was a half an hour show. Everything else could wait. I'd take my half hour and I'd do my yoga with Lilius. So I know that half a dozen postures. But she said, yoga would help you through any situation. So I was like, okay, yoga, do your stuff. If you're going to do it, now's the time. I made my own schedule, my own routine. I would do my yoga to clear the anxiety, emotions, and stress. Then I would meditate to bring in energy from outside. And then prayer, hoping to receive some answers. But it connected me. It made me realize that this energy within me coming from outside, that I was no a prisoner except physically. In any other aspect of my life, I found a freedom that I never knew existed before. That was amazing. That was life-changing. I could send my energy out every evening. I sent my energy out to my children because I didn't have windows. I couldn't really tell time. There was breakfast, then lunch, then dinner, and then the long period from dinner to breakfast. That's night. So that's how I could tell time. That time when I thought it was bedtime, I would sit and send my energy out to the children, to send them my love, to put them to bed. Later, I would send my energy out to Jesse and we'd swirl around out in the atmosphere somewhere. I found a freedom that I never knew even existed before. And it was quite
Incredible.
extraordinary.
Extraordinary. Was that all within the first 5 years as well that you'd found that?
That was within the first months. Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't have existed the way I was for that long. I would have been destroyed. I decided I wasn't going to let them destroy me. They might kill me, but until they did take my life or release me, I wasn't going to let them destroy me and who I was. I realized that I was the spirit here on my journey. And even my little, wherever I am is my home, because this is my home. And wherever I am, that means is I'm home. So, but what the next miraculous thing that happened as a result was not only one, because I was seeing myself as a spirit here on my journey, then I also had to see the jailers as spirits here on their journey, and the judge and the prosecutor and the man who lied and the woman who came into my trial and lied. They're all spirits here on their journey too. So it allowed me to have compassion and to not see them as the enemy anymore. And as a matter of fact, I felt in some cases that I'd rather have my journey than theirs.
Because on your website, you had healing and forgiveness were the keys to a happy
Yeah.
life. Is that what
Well,
allowed?
forgiveness didn't come till later because forgiveness is a big deal. It's not something you just do and go, okay, I've done it. It's done. No, you have to do it over and over again because things come up. My children are grown ups, and I know something happens in one of their lives that is because of what happened to me and the effect that it had on them. And that upsets me, make me angry. And I have to do it again. Breathe, clear it, clear the emotions. It's yoga, but I do it with the breath now. I don't have to necessarily get down and do the forward bends for anger or the backward bends to open the heart chakra. Of course, they're very helpful, but I've gotten to a point where I can do it all internally now with my breath and my energy. So that's what the postures are leading us to, where we can clear ourselves to the point where you can just do it with your breaths and your energy. Because in the end, that's all we have with our breath and that little bit of energy. Just before we transition again, I've learned to use my breath and energy to clear the anger or whatever it is. And then with the next breath, I bring in clear energy and send out forgiveness. Until the next time. Because we're human, and I wouldn't want to be anything other because that connects me to everybody else. I don't think ever reach what they call perfection because if not for this world, we are perfect in our imperfections. Mhm.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Your energy. Oh, it's incredible, Sonny. Did you ever think you were getting out, or did you just accept it and held like? Because clearly you connected to the greater source, and there was, like you said, the inner acceptance and the strength that came within you, saying you. It's like Bruce Lipton. I keep hearing his quote, but he said, "Knowledge is power, but knowledge of self is self empowerment." And it felt like you became
Mm.
self empowered in there.
Well, I didn't ever accept I had to accept the possibility. They had all the power. They just didn't
Yeah.
know about my special powers. It was a possibility, and I had to accept that that was possibility, but it also was just as possible because I had chosen to believe in hope that they might make a mistake and send me home. And so, like I said, either way, the best thing I could do was to make myself the best person that I could be in the meantime. So that's basically how I dealt with it. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So that's how I lived. And that changed the way I saw things myself. It's like I was able to have humor again. Humor is very important. It's very underrated, but it's very important to have humor and to be creative. Even if you're sentenced to death, there's even more so, there's a need to create. If you've seen V, Jeff C. V from Vendetta.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, it's one of my favorite movies. So when she finds a little note in the crack in the wall, it's from the woman who was in there previously, and she gets determined she's going to make it. It was kind of like that. I became whatever I was going to, but they wouldn't destroy me anyway. I used to, like, for instance, I started to see when they came every single hour and write down whatever I could hear the footsteps coming down the hall. I was like, here comes my entertainment. The face would show up in the little window and I could make them write down whatever I wanted. I had power. They had to write down whatever I was doing. I could stand up in the middle of the cell and spin around in circles and they'd have to write that down. One time I lay down on the floor, I put my hand behind my shaving, and I had to write that down. I discovered I did have a little bit of power after all. People are the same everywhere. Prison is like a microcosm of the outside. There was one very nice guard. When no other guards were around, she'd sometimes bring me this extra cup of coffee in the morning. And one time she gave me a newspaper. That was amazing. And so I thought, now, what can I do with this newspaper? I mean, this was a resource I hadn't had before. And so I thought back, like, what did the people long ago, like the native people, and even back further, cave people, what did they do? I tore the newspaper into strips, wove them together, and I made a little mat. And I covered the toilet. I didn't have to live in it, looking at a toilet for the rest of my life. You know, that was great. I had control now, power and control. I could have some control over my environment. So then I made another mat that I could sit on the floor when I didn't have to do everything sitting on my bed like a sick person. And so they'd bring the food and slide it through a slot in the door. On my mat, I'd sit on it. And I had a picture from the magazine section of a beautiful display of vegetarian still. So it was like eggplant, tomatoes, and so it was gorgeous. So I would paste that up with toothpaste on the back of the door, and I'd sit and eat this indescribable stuff looking at that. It was amazing. With a little humor and a little creativity, you can go a long way. It just changed everything for me. It was amazing.
How long were you in prison for? And at what point did you realize that you think, wow, I might be getting out here? Things are changing.
In the first 5 years, I was sentenced to death, and my first appeal came up. As a result of my first appeal, they changed my sentence. The conviction remained. They changed my sentence because the judge had not given a proper reason for overruling the jury. And my appointed lawyer said he wasn't prepared to discuss the death penalty. So they changed my sentence. That meant I had to go into the prison population, which in some ways was great. I was the happiest prisoner. I could talk to people. I could go out of my cell. It was amazing. I talked so much for the first 3 days that I lost my voice entirely because your voice, I mean, it's a muscle, and if it atrophies, if you don't use it, after not speaking much for 5 years, all that talking did my voice in the orientation building after my sentence changed. It was fun to run up and down the stairs until the guard told me, no more. I ran back to my cell. It was an amazing experience. And then they gave me a job in the kitchen. I guess because they thought, because I was a vegetarian, I would know something about food. Some bureaucrats came in, and when they found out I was working in the kitchen, they I'd not be allowed to work in the kitchen anymore. So I just was allowed to clean the library, clean the education buildings. But that was okay because I would fold the hand towels nicely, put little messages on the toilet roll around the toilet seat to show that it had been cleaned. Leave birthday messages for staff members, and I knew it was their birthday. So whatever it was, joyful, it's a choice. And I knew that you always have a choice, even in your darkest moments when it seems like there's no way but you have a choice how you go down with a smile on your face, or you can go down screaming. So it's your choice. That's one of my secret weapons.
Yeah. And it's a that we all need to hear. We always have a choice, some of the things that we get caught up on in our daily life and get stuck on. Where's the heart of it all?
After a couple of years, they moved me to a different, newer prison that was opened up for women. I had a bigger cell then, which was quite nice, but it was in the hospital confinement area of the prison. Again, I was totally isolated, but I was allowed to have a watch. That was a big deal because I could see time then. I could see hours, It wasn't just breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the long time in between. And so that watch became another one of my secret weapons because it's not healthy to avoid being emotional. Anger has a purpose. It can help you through a tough situation, but staying angry for too long can be toxic. You need to be able to deal with it and have tools to let it go. The watch helped me to invent the 5-minute rule. Things would happen to really piss you off, really make you justifiably angry. I'd go, fine. This might be the last day of my life because none of us know what it will be. You could walk outside living in a lovely condo, the whole building collapses, like happened last week. It can happen anytime. I decided that whatever made me angry or whoever it was didn't deserve to ruin what might be the last of my life. So I look at the watch, 5 minutes, yell, scream, bang on the walls, whatever it took. And then, okay, 5 minutes is up. That's it. Now I will think of recipes that I'll cook for my children when I get home. Or I will think of a song that makes me happy, a place I always wanted to go to, or some place I had been that always was nice for me, or think of my cat purring or whatever. And in those days, I would do some yoga poses to help me deal with it. If it came back, maybe it needed another 5 minutes, and I would give it that. Some things I decided are worth sometimes. That's okay. But you are in charge of how long that emotion lasts. The emotion is not in charge of you. That's huge. So, of course, you have to give it some time. You have to honor and respect those emotions and give them some vent. And then that's enough. That's it. Now it's time to. And that became the basis of Forgive Me.
Do you know how, during that time, how Jesse was coping? Like, was there much communication between the pair of you?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. We wrote every day. Every single day, that was what I did. And all through the day, I'd start a letter with the date. And then I put 9 a.m. That's 9:25, 11 o'clock. All through the day, I would write to him. And he would do the same for me. We wrote every day until he was executed. That was huge for me. After my sentence was changed, I was put into the population. I had art supplies, paints, and pastel chalks. I would go out in the evening and do a painting of the sunset or the skies, and I would use that for my letter. I always kept up that practice of meditation. Every evening, I meditated to send love to my children. And every night at 11 o'clock, when all the prisons in the whole state would be quiet, absolutely quiet, and everybody have to sit on the bed for count time, that's when I would meditate and send myself out into the atmosphere to meet Jesse. And we'd swirl around there together for a while before bed. Yeah. So I always kept up that practice. And when the children were able to visit with my parents, which was only 4 times a year, I taught them about the energy and meditating and the feeling they have when we're together. That's my energy. And when you feel that energy, that's me sending you my love. And I taught them to meditate and recognize the feeling of each other's energy.
Your relationship with your children. How old were you when you went into prison, and how old were you when you came out?
I was 27. Sometimes they say 28. But anyway, I was 27, 28 years old. My son was 9. My daughter was 10 months old. When I was released 17 years later, my son was a grown man with a 3.5-year-old daughter of his own. And my daughter, when she was 15, her father was executed. Jesse was executed. And it was a very horrible execution. The chair malfunctioned, and instead of dying, he caught fire, and it was horrendous. When she heard about what happened to him, she tried and her foster family, because my parents died in a plane crash a year after my sentence was changed from death to life. Decided that they could finally take a vacation that didn't involve the plane crash, and they died. So the children became orphans again. My son, after about a year or so, he went out on his own. But my daughter, she was only 7 when they died. So she went into foster care. And when Jessie was executed and she was 15, they didn't know what to do because there is no help for the families or children of people who were sentenced to death. They decided to send her to a school for children with behavioral and emotional problems, where usually children are sentenced by a court. She was locked up until she was 18 years old in that place. Basically lost touch with the children at that point. It was very, very difficult. So when I was released, my daughter, Christina, was still in that very restrictive school where I was not allowed any contact. I wasn't even allowed to write her a letter. I was completely cut off from her and her from me. When I was released with a cardboard box with everything I owned in the world, which wasn't much, and all my writing, which I had been sending out through the years. So I at least had that. My childhood friend who had become involved in the end, trying to help the lawyers with my appeals, her name was Mickey. She ordered me to see my son and meet my granddaughter because I wasn't able to cross the street from prison where you're not even allowed to run to trying to deal with cars going by at 40 miles an hour. I couldn't manage all that. The markets were totally overwhelming. All the choices you have to make. I was kind of an alien. That's how I felt. I felt like an alien who had been dropped down on Earth. And then I was just pretending to be like everybody else, but I wasn't. And I'm still it's okay now. She took me to visit my son and his wife and spend some time with my granddaughter, Claudia, who said, "Grandma, I know why you never visited me because you were lost." And I said, "Yes, Claudia, I was, but I will never be lost again."
Mm.
And then I read her story and she went to sleep with me. And it was just the most beautiful moment. Nikki took me up to visit my daughter, Christina, who was still locked up. The school arranged a confrontation because she'd been mad at me because she thought I lied. Because I always said, "I'll be home by Christmas. I'll be home by your birthday. I'll be home by your graduation. I'll be home." And I never came home. I never thought it would take so long. She said to them, "I was mad, but I'm not mad anymore because she's here. Can I introduce her to my friends?" She took me and introduced me to her friends, and it was really great. And then accepted my friend's invitation to go live in Los Angeles, California with them because my son told me I would always have a home with him and his family. He had lost all faith in society and was living way out in the woods. But that gave me the courage to go, would try out Los Angeles with my friends because I knew I could always retreat to my son's little house in the woods. So that's what I did. And I went to Los Angeles to live with them. I lived with them for about a year because I had no money. I couldn't get a place of my own. I had no clothes except for what I brought from the prison: two white shirts, two pairs of jeans, six pairs of underwear, and two pairs of shoes. So I lived with them, myself a yoga job because nobody else would hire me. I was 45 years old when I came out. When I went in, I was a young mother, a wife, and a daughter. I was 27 years old. When I came out, I was a widow, an orphan, and a grandmother. Nobody's hiring 45-year-old women. My work record, so by myself, doing what I knew how to do. Because when I was released from death row and everybody saw how healthy I was, the other prisoners would ask me, "What did you do to stay healthy?" And I would show them on the weekends. I'd show them yoga, and it worked. I ended up teaching yoga in the prison for all the years I was there. And in the end, about 2 years before I was finally released, we went local junior college and got a yoga teacher in because they finally noticed there was an interest in yoga. And when the yoga teacher saw what we were doing, she brought the Swami. Just so happened there was a Swami nearby. How does that happen? And 82-year-old Naranda came in, became my mentor and teacher. And she would use me as a demonstrator, and she was fine-tuning my practice. And that's when I found out we were really doing yoga the right way, moving energy and using the breath. It was fantastic. She certified me to teach just before I was released. I got a job teaching yoga in a local community center. And then I would do whatever I could, whatever odd job anybody had for me. Because my friends told their friends about my situation. People would hire me to pack up their house if they were moving, babysit, walk their dog, or anything. Then finally, when my daughter was released from that school, after about a year, she came to me and we got an apartment together. We had to try 4 different times to make it work because I was no longer entitled to be her mother. Who was I? A stranger. She didn't know me. In fact, she'd been told most of her life that we were guilty. And the foster family even saved the news clippings to show her when she got older that even though we always said we were innocent, look, it's written in the papers, so it must be true. They're guilty. So she grew up not knowing what to think and thinking that she probably would end up in prison too because she was told she had bad genes from us.
I have to ask you, the people that made the conviction and have been involved, has anyone been held accountable for what they've done since?
It's a good question, a fair question, and the answer is no. And they never are. I've heard of 1 or 2 cases in recent years where a prosecutor was given maybe a suspended sentence. And we know now that sometimes police are being held accountable. I received an email from someone who said they had been a police during that time, kept their mouth shut on cases where things were done wrong. Now they are an investigator and work on some of the cases they participated in wrongly years ago to right the wrongs and to make sure that wrongful convictions don't happen as a result anymore. And that person apologized to me. First apology I've ever received. A brave person, a good person. But nobody ever has. That's part of the problem where wrongful convictions happen because there are no consequences. A prosecutor can do whatever they want, and there are no consequences. They can say, like in mine, I didn't know it was going to be important. Otherwise, I would have given you that information. No consequence. So why not do it anyway? We all know there are no consequences. So they do what they want to do. And it's not always with malice. Sometimes they really believe. There's this thing that we now call cognitive bias. You believe a certain thing. You believe that that's true. And so you look for whatever is going to prove what you believe. And you tend to ignore or not think about what doesn't prove what you believe. Even if you find out later, if I admit I'm wrong, I'll be fired, I'll get sued. Therefore, it happens and nobody gets in trouble for it. That's something in the justice system, not just in America, everywhere. Peter and I have been to 13 countries. It's the same everywhere, including Kazakhstan, including Taiwan. I haven't been there yet. All through Europe, America, Canada, Australia. It's the same. My book was published by Random House, and the Australian region made it their book of the year. It was about 2007. My book was Book of
There
the
you go.
Year in Australia. It's been a very interesting journey, but we found that it's the same everywhere. And the reason? Human nature.
Yeah, I was
It's
going to
human
say
nature.
it's the human condition. Just want to ask you a couple of questions because I'm aware at the time I couldn't script this. Like it's incredible your journey and what you've been on. When you look back on it now, do you try to make do you,
To make sense of their life, really.
so,
I think you can follow the thread, and there's a theme, through it, and there's a learning curve through it. I should tell you also that part of this learning and theme is that the next one to come, my son, also came to live with us after a while. His marriage broke up, and he and his daughter came, and we became a family again. By then, even my granddaughter was bigger than me. We found a way to come back together again and to forgive. That was the legacy I wanted to leave to my children. If you want to make sense of it, that's what makes sense of it. I could leave a legacy of anger, retribution, or I could leave a legacy of happiness, joy, healing, and forgiveness. That was what I chose. to lead. And that's the way I chose to live my life. And that's what I shared with them to the extent that each of them is able at this point in their life. They've done so. I think they're amazing, my children. They've really done well with the life that they were given. Each of us is here on our own journey. All these things that happen to us, the good, the bad, the ugly, the divine, it's all part of your journey, dependent on the choices that you make throughout your journey. I believe that the purpose is to learn or accomplish something that we came to accomplish. Then you get to transition again and move on. I think it's really important to share something that I learned recently, because when you get to a certain age, you experience more and more people leaving the planet, transitioning away from this life. I decided that because we always do have a choice, no matter how my end is, with that last breath, I'm going to fill myself up with as much love as I possibly can and send it out. And that's how I'm going to go. I have that choice. We have that power. I think that's important to share, especially now through the times and people experiencing so much. I think it's very empowering and calming. It gives you a sense of peace that with that very last breath, I can decide.
Thank you for sharing. It truly is. I'm debating but I will anyway, because there's one
Yes,
question I ask
yes.
everyone on the show. With everything we've covered today, and imagine this right now, and they've been would have been captivated from start to finish, I assure you. Is there anything you'd like to leave them to listen to ponder on all we've covered?
Well, I do want to say that my choices when I was young weren't that great. Maybe it was part of my journey, but I didn't make such great choices. It's important to surround yourself with positive people. Sometimes we have toxic people in our life, but we have to have them there. It might be people you work with or people in your own family, people who drain energy instead of giving energy. That's just who they are and how they are, and that's their journey. But they create boundaries, distance, so that I can deal with those people, but they don't come into my closest, most intimate circle. The most intimate person with me, of course, is my husband, Peter, now, and one other friend. We've developed a system of sharing. The reason that my relationship worked with Peter is because we connected on what you might call a spiritual level, about how we looked or what music we liked or what food we ate. It was about the deeper things, the things that really important: integrity, respect, loves children and animals. Those, I think that's what made it work. We've developed a system of sharing where if something bothers me that he's doing, I can say, I would like to share something with you. And that means that it's not a discussion, but neither is it an accusation. It's a me statement. When you use a certain tone of voice or certain words, it makes me feel like when I was back in prison. And I know you wouldn't want to do that. So I just thought you should know. Now you can translate that into any situation in your life. If somebody is impatient with you, you could say, when I feel rushed, I get this very upsetting feeling inside me, makes me feel afraid. Whatever it is for you. And I just thought you should know that. And the person can say, would you like me to respond or can I respond? And you can say, no, I don't want to right now. And what happens with me and Peter is maybe later he'll say, I was thinking about what you said and I'm going to try to not do that or say that anymore. Thank you. And that's it. It really helps. So I think you can develop ways of being in yourself and of communicating with others, but it's always positive. Even something negative can be dealt with in a positive way because it's to make it better. not just to express whatever it is that you're feeling at the time. It can be done in a nice way. And you can always use the 5-minute rule beforehand to vent first. My children were the first ones to teach me that, because they said sometimes my energy would make them feel upset. I understood it as putting out too much energy, too strong. So I asked them to tell me when they felt that. And they would say, "Mom, you're doing it." I'd go in the other room and just breathe, release the emotion, or take the energy down a level, fill myself up with love again, come out and start over. It only takes a couple of breaths. I make videos now. I don't do podcasts, but I'm thinking about it. I make videos of tips and stories, and I put them on my YouTube to share with people. And in this age of Zoom, I don't feel virtual. I feel like I've met you and exchanged energy. I don't feel like that's virtual, it's just not physical.
There's a reason why I do this every week, to talk to amazing people like yourself. It's connecting. It certainly is. And I love it. I'll be to link to your website, and I believe your book is available on your website as well.
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon, but it'll cost you a fortune. Through the website, we can sign it before we send it out.
That'd be amazing. I just, anyone listening today will come over and check you out on your YouTube and everything, because you're an amazing woman, and I've been getting to know you a little bit more today. And
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on and sharing. I appreciate it from the depths of my heart.
Thank you. I've been to Australia before, and that's where my son lives.
Oh, wow.
My son lives there. Yes, I'm hoping that this might lead to me getting invited back to Australia again, so I can visit him and my granddaughter. So there you go.
Hopefully, let me know when you're coming out.
That would be the gift for telling my story this time. That would be very
Yeah.
nice.
There you go.
A pleasure. Thanks. Bye.